Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Boy in Love by J. Crownover and Rebecca Yaros. Narrated by J.F. Harding and Sofia Willingham. Chapter 1. Iker. 9 months later. Post-deployment. I'm glad you didn't die. The words were spoken softly and without a hint of humor. They were followed by a loud sniff and my little brother trying to subtly wipe at his eyes so I wouldn't notice the fact he was fighting back tears. He was serious. He said the same words to me every single time I came back from a deployment, no matter what condition I returned in. And he always cried, which meant I always had to fight back tears of my own. I hooked an arm around Gael's neck and rubbed the knuckles of my free hand against the top of his head, clearing my throat so I could speak through the emotion caught there. Me too, kid. I told you I would be back in one piece. You know I always keep my word. I wasn't a guy who made promises I couldn't keep, and I refused to let my baby brother down. Everything I did, every choice I made, both good and bad, were so that Gael could have a better life, so he could do more, be more, and live beyond the means I'd always felt held me back when I was his age. Promising him over and over again nothing would happen to me while I was deployed to some of the most dangerous places in the world was the only time I made a vow knowing I might not be able to come through in the end. But the words made us feel better, even if we both recognized how empty and useless they were at the end of the day. I was lucky homecoming coincided with Gael's first summer break from college. I'd spent 9 months living in an emotional kaleidoscope of fear, anger, boredom, and regret. Seeing my baby brother struggling to look tough and keep his tears in check instantly launched me back into protective big brother mode and sent me crashing back to reality. I was no longer just a soldier, a cog in the machine of war. Now, seeing Gael instantly forced all the feelings I'd purposely locked down and hid away when I had a job to do, back to the surface, far earlier than I was ready for. I left my truck with him when I left for the desert, and he'd surprise me by driving halfway across the country and meeting me as soon as my boots were back on Colorado soil. This wasn't my first or last deployment, but it was the first time I'd ever come back and had someone I loved waiting for me. I purposely kept my ties to others minimal and loose. I didn't want anyone waiting around, living half a life while I was in some godforsaken place, dodging bullets and doing things I couldn't talk about. I usually even encouraged my brother and my grandmother, the only family I had, to give me a few weeks to decompress and shift out of survival mode before coming to visit me, or before I would make the trip home after a deployment. Gael showing up unannounced was one more reminder my little brother wasn't exactly so little anymore. In fact, he seemed to have grown a couple of inches while I was away. He almost met me eye to eye now, and since we were on the same level, there was no missing the exhaustion and worry coloring his watery gaze. I used my hold on his neck to drag him toward his truck. I knew he was going to try and leave the truck with me whenever he decided to leave, but I wasn't going to take it. He needed it more than I did, and it was important to me Gael never wanted for anything. Thanks for coming, but let's get out of here. I'm starving. I also wanted to sleep for a solid week so I could reset. I can't believe you came for the homecoming ceremony. The shock of seeing my baby brother in the crowd of excited wives and girlfriends and crying kids had finally worn off. If Gael and I didn't look so much alike, I might have missed him altogether because I was conditioned to ignore the pang of remorse that I never let anyone in, never let anyone get close enough to wait for me. If one of my fellow soldiers hadn't elbowed me and muttered, "Alvarez, is that your brother? He looks just like you," I would have totally overlooked Gael. I've wanted to come for a long time. Gael pushed out of my headlock and lifted a hand to brush his hair back from his forehead. You're always so secretive and private when it comes to what you're doing and where you're going. I grew up with you knowing every single move I made. It never seemed very fair that I've always been on the outside looking in when it comes to you. He'd always been a scarily smart kid, but he was now growing into an incredibly good-looking and well-rounded young man. Seeing him so composed and no longer looking at me like I hung the moon and had all the answers to everything in the universe sent warm tendrils of pride skittering through me. Maybe, just possibly, I'd done an all right job raising the kid. Maybe it was time to breathe a little easier and start working at building a life of my own. I don't think I've ever had a choice to make that wasn't hard. I doubt I've gotten it right every single time, but everything I've ever done, I always put you and your future first. I dragged a hand down my face, knowing I looked gaunt and tired. I'm not exactly at my best when I get back from a deployment. It would take weeks until I started to feel like myself again. My brother snorted and bumped me with his shoulder. I stumbled a little at the contact and heard Gael suck in a breath in surprise. Out of the corner of my eye, I watched as he shook his head. Iker. His tone was low and serious. I don't always need your best. After everything, after all you've done for me, all you've sacrificed. I got another headshake and a narrow-eyed look. I think you can cut yourself some slack. He shook the keys in his hand in front of my face and shot me a lopsided grin. You look like you're about to fall over. Let's get some food, and I'll take you home. I sighed and nodded. I'd subleased my apartment while I was gone, so I really had no idea what home was going to look like, or what condition it was going to be in. But the thought of sleeping in my own bed was enough to make me ignore any lingering worries. There were all kinds of little details I needed to take care of now that I was back on my home turf, like getting my cell phone turned back on. I was going to have to move that to the top of my to-do list. Seeing Gael's iPhone sticking out of his back pocket, I made a gimme gesture and ordered him to hand the device over. Being a typical teenager, he resisted at first, asking a million questions about what I wanted his phone for. I'd rather have all my teeth pulled out with a rusty pair of pliers before I told him the truth. It was tricky to admit to myself I wanted his phone to check up on a girl I had no right to still be thinking about. And no, there was no way I could wait until tomorrow to creep on her social media. The itch had been under my skin since the minute I walked away from her. If I was going to be honest with what I was up to, Gael would know exactly what I was like when I wasn't at my best, and I wasn't sure I was ready for him to see those jagged, uneven parts of me. After a short wrestling match, which I was going to win no matter what, I got my hands on the phone. I pushed Gael toward the truck as I tapped on the screen, pulling up her info as my heart felt like it was tying itself into a million knots. I sighed when I saw her face. It had been 9 months, but it was burned on my brain. I could still see her sleepy, soft face, so innocent and unassuming. She had no idea I was going to leave her behind, that I always planned to walk away from her. She never asked, but I lied by omission nonetheless. Langley Vaughn. Her name was as fancy, high-class, and unique as she was. She started way the hell out of my league, and I'd made sure it ended with her knowing exactly why the two of us could never work out. However, despite the purposeful and possibly cruel steps I'd taken to make sure she didn't waste any more time hung up on me, I couldn't stop thinking about her. I was really good at pushing everything and anyone who was a distraction out of my mind while I did what I had to do. But Langley Vaughn was the exception. She was always there, hovering, lurking, clinging to my every thought and feeling. I'd forced her to let me go, but I'd been unable to do the same. Her sunshiny blonde hair was shorter than when I left her alone in that king-sized bed. She looked a little thinner, and I could tell her smile was forced in a handful of the photos she had posted on Instagram. I absently rubbed at the spot on my chest where my heart clenched painfully when I noticed in most of her current photos she looked genuinely happy and carefree. I told myself over and over again it would be better if she got over me, but I guess I wasn't really prepared to witness the proof she had. Sighing, I handed the phone back to my brother, noticing we hadn't moved because he was too busy watching what I was doing over my shoulder. He tapped his phone on his thigh and asked, "Does she have anything to do with you managing to pay off my tuition last minute, when that grant I was counting on fell through my first semester?" His dark eyebrows lifted, and I silently cursed him for always being so damn smart and perceptive. "You told me before you left you had a funny story to tell me. It doesn't look like you're very amused, though." I sighed again and closed my eyes. I tilted my head to the side so it could rest against the passenger's side window. I needed money, fast, and she has a lot of it. She needed a date who would rub her very rich family the wrong way, and I was free. Our paths should have never crossed, but they did. And I'd felt off balance and uneasy ever since. She's a good girl, sweet as can be. Gael started the truck and muttered something I couldn't hear under his breath. I cracked open an eye and gave him a questioning look. What did you say? He frowned as he maneuvered my truck from the parking spot out into the flow of traffic. You like her? It wasn't a question, which was a good thing because the last thing I wanted to do was start lying to the one person who could see through me. Yeah, I like her. More than liked her. She was the one person I wanted to hold on to, even though I knew she had been slipping through my fingers from the start. Doesn't matter. I made sure she doesn't like me anymore before I left. I didn't tell her I was deploying and dipped out on her almost as soon as she decided she can lean on me and trust me. Are you going to let her know you're back? Maybe explain why you left the way you did? It was hard to hear the hope in his voice. It was even more difficult to keep that same feeling from taking root in my heart. Squeezing my eyes and letting my hands curl into loose fists, I muttered, She's better off without me. Because unlike him, Langley had seen me at my worst. She knew I could play the role of the villain just as easily as I jumped in to be the hero. It looked like she'd already started to move on with her life, and it would be best if I did the same thing. I reached out a hand and clapped it on the back of my baby brother's neck. Feed me, kid. I'm dying over here. It was a clumsy way to change the subject, but effective. Gael fell silent, and I realized our roles had flipped. I was used to being the one taken care of and constantly worrying about him. Today, Gael was the one who showed up and proceeded to take care of me. It was the first time I came back from an active war zone and had someone there to keep me upright and steady while the world shifted and settled around me. The only person who would ever know I secretly wondered what it would feel like if it was an elegant, classy blonde waiting for me instead of my baby brother was me.
Chapter 2. Langley. You're certain you won't let me throw you a party? Dad asked as I locked my apartment door. Nope. I nearly dropped the phone from where I had it wedged between my ear and shoulder as I struggled with the deadbolt. It slid home, and I grabbed my messenger bag from the hallway floor as my neighbor passed without waving. I waved at them anyway. Maybe it wasn't the friendliest building in downtown Colorado Springs, but it sure beat the sorority house. Not that I hadn't enjoyed living with 44 of my Greek sisters the last couple of years. Having every meal prepared was a definite bonus, especially during finals. However, I wasn't exactly setting myself up for adulthood if I couldn't manage to make my own grilled cheese. After living solo this last year, I wasn't a half-bad cook. Master Chef wasn't banging down my door or anything, but I survived. Nope, meaning you won't let me throw you one? Or no, you're not certain you want one? No, you can't throw me a party. I grinned and shook my head, even though he couldn't see me. Pretty sure everyone on this side of the Rockies heard my father's overly dramatic sigh of disappointment. Come on, you hate parties just as much as I do. I opened the door to the stairwell and clicked my way down a flight of stairs in my favorite pair of red-soled heels. Not when I get to celebrate my daughter graduating college, I don't. Maybe I want to shout it from the rooftops. You know how proud I am of you, Langley. I do, and I appreciate it. I pushed through the door that led straight into the parking lot and headed for my car. Just having you at graduation is enough to make me happy. Make sure she gets those seats, I heard Virginia call through the phone. Not having to live with my stepmother during breaks and holidays away from school was yet another perk of having my own apartment. I'll do no such thing, Dad answered. It came through muffled, like he held his hand over the phone's mic. I don't give a damn if Camille thinks it's too far to walk. No, Virginia, she does not qualify for special consideration. I unlocked my car and swung my bag into the passenger seat before climbing behind the wheel as they continued bickering.
"Because she's pregnant, not disabled," he barked. "And if she were the one graduating, maybe I'd care. Tell her to wear some flats and deal with it."
"Dad, I need to head out to my interview," I said, when there was a lull in their back and forth. The engine purred to life, and I made my way out of the lot as the call connected through my Bluetooth.
"Right, I'm sorry. At least let me take you to dinner. You and your boyfriend. What was his name? Steve? Simon?"
His voice came through the speakers, full of amusement. "Yes, Sam's coming tomorrow, but he isn't my boyfriend, remember?" I pulled out into traffic and checked the clock. Good, I left myself a good 20-minute buffer before my interview. And sure, maybe it was only 10 minutes away, in really heavy traffic, but you never got a second chance to make the best impression, and I sure as hell wasn't going to be late. I wanted this internship more than anything. I would have even put up with living with Virginia for the summer if it meant I got to put Overland Financial on my resume. Don't go that far.
"Right. Sam isn't your boyfriend. He's just a guy you see from time to time. What do you call that?"
Dad's sarcasm wasn't lost on me. "Casual, Dad. I call it casual. I also call it a huge regret that I even mentioned him to you." Dad had gone all background check crazy the moment I'd mentioned I had a date last month. Sam and I weren't exclusive or labeled. We just happened to date every once in a while. He was the perfect distraction when I needed it the most.
"Is she still seeing that construction worker?"
Virginia bellowed. "Electrician," I answered, not that it mattered. Anyone who worked with their hands didn't count as a worthwhile human in Virginia's book, unless they were using their hands to count money.
"Oh, come on, Langley!"
Virginia's voice was shrill in the background.
"Let me set you up with one of the guys from the club. You know, June Maxfield's boy is graduating from Harvard this weekend, and he'll be home for the summer."
"Henry Maxfield is an asshole. No, thank you," I replied, then winced. Over the last 9 months, I'd gotten better at speaking my mind. A little too good sometimes. Luckily, Dad just laughed, and I heard the distinct sound of a door shutting. "I like Sam just fine." Sam was nice, kind, smart. Called when he said he would, showed up when he said he would, never pressured me to give more than I was willing. There was a whole list of qualities I liked about Sam. Plus, he was here. He wasn't off fighting in a war halfway across the world he hadn't even bothered to tell me about while I'd been busy falling in love with him. Not like some other guys I'd dated. Fake dated. Whatever the hell it had been. I was no longer hung up on Iker Alvarez. No longer losing sleep over him, no longer thinking about him every minute of every day. Just every other minute.
"I'm sure you like Sam. He must be a good guy if you've been out with him a few times now."
His tone sagged, and I pictured him flopping into his leather office chair.
"I was just wondering if maybe you'd heard from—"
"Do not finish that sentence," I warned as I pulled up to a red light. "No, I haven't heard. No, he hasn't reached out. Just let it go, Dad, I sure as hell have." Or so I tried to convince myself time and time again. Some days the lie was easier to buy than others.
"Yeah, it definitely sounds like you have."
His sarcasm dripped about as thick as molasses. My hands clenched on the steering wheel as I shoved every single thought and memory of him as far from my consciousness as possible. Not going there. Not when I was finally healed and happy.
"Sorry, honey,"
Dad said softly after another few seconds of silence. Someone honked behind me and I startled. Right, the light was green. Green meant go. Green did not mean lament about guys who never gave a shit about you. "It's okay," I told Dad as I turned into the parking lot in front of the office building I'd been staring at all year. "I just pulled in, so I'm going to head up for my interview."
"I still don't understand why you won't take an internship at Vaughn Holdings. I happen to know the owner would love to take you on."
Like a magnet, my attention hopped across the street to the taller building that housed Dad's firm. It would have been so much easier to say yes to him, to slide into the position that had been earmarked for me since birth. Dad probably had a nameplate engraved with my name on it already and everything. It would have made him so happy if I accepted his offer. But somewhere in the last year, I'd stopped prioritizing everyone else's happiness above my own. Not that selfishness was my goal, but not being a martyr any longer was now definitely up there, right behind breathing and eating. "Dad, you know I want to do this on my own," I said gently. "But you don't have to, Langley. I'm incredibly proud that you're independent and driven. Really, I am. But you're a Vaughn. Generations of Vaughns have sacrificed to get us where we are, to make sure you don't have to start the ball game taking a fastball." I'd hardly call my trust fund and upbringing taking a fastball. More like starting on third with a lead and the coach screaming at me to head for home. Not like him, the one I refused to think about. He hadn't even started the ball game on the field. No, he'd clawed his way into the park and been forced to prove himself before anyone had even deemed him worthy of a bat. I hated that I had admired him for it. Hated that he'd hijacked my train of thought yet again. "Fair point. I just hate knowing that I can make your life easier and you won't let me. That's pretty much a dad's entire job, you know." I glanced at the clock. Still 15 minutes early. A dad's entire job is to raise a decent human being. Which he had. Sure, I got jealous from time to time and even petty, but I'd like to think I was on the okay side of the moral compass. "You know I love you for wanting to help me, but this is something I really need to do on my own." He sighed. "Okay, I respect that. Tell Peter I said hello." My stomach clenched. "Tell me you did not call Peter Overland and tell him that I'm interviewing." "Of course not," Dad scoffed. "But if you think he won't put 2 and 2 together, then you're sorely underestimating him. Now go take on the world, Tiger. I'll see you at graduation tomorrow. I'll be the one in black." I spoke fluent sarcasm as well. "Love you," he chuckled. Echoing the sentiment, I hung up and killed the engine. After I took a moment to straighten my blouse and skirt, I headed into the building with a lot more confidence than I was actually feeling. The lobby was quiet for a Friday afternoon, and my heels echoed on the marble as I walked toward the elevator. Wait, was 12 minutes early too early? Would it say I was organized and ready, or desperate and bored? 5 minutes would be better. I sat in one of the armchairs that faced a wishing fountain and debated throwing my entire trust fund in with the hopes I'd land this internship. That would have been a major disappointment to the 2 college students that trust fund was currently putting through school, so it probably wasn't the best idea. Then again, as of tomorrow, I was a graduate, and paying off the entirety of the balance on Gael's tuition last week had been a no-brainer. I had money. He didn't. It wasn't like I couldn't take the financial hit. Hell, I made that much in interest over a year's time. At least his brother won't have to gigolo himself out for his brother's education ever again. I hadn't done it for him, though. I'd made the call and dropped the cash because the kid was smart, ambitious, and deserved to start the ball game at least on first base. Both of the kids I decided to help out did. All kids wanting to pursue higher education did. Hoping to soothe my nerves, I took out my phone and opened my Instagram, scrolling through my latest notifications. When I noticed one of my sorority sisters had liked an older picture on my feed, I clicked on the image out of force of habit to see what had caught her eye. Or rather, who. Iker Alvarez. So much for not thinking about him when I couldn't bring myself to erase him totally from my life. My chest tightened as those deep brown eyes stared out at me from the picture he'd snapped the night I'd met him. Why didn't I just delete the post and spare myself this scab-breaking open sensation of loss? For the same reason I kept that stupid, wonderful letter he'd left the morning he snuck out on me. It wasn't in a place of honor or anything. I shoved it into my glove box between my owner's manual and the map Dad insisted I carry, even with the GPS, and had simply forgotten to throw it out. Liar. I cursed the sorority sister who'd liked the picture, but didn't look away. I'd never been able to look away from Iker, which had been half of my freaking problem. The guy was gorgeous. The other half of my issue stemmed from the fact that he was just as beautiful on the inside as he was out, with the exception that he'd left me naked and sleeping in a 5-star resort while he snuck out, breaking my heart in the process. Yeah, that took the pretty on the inside factor down a notch. My thumb hovered over the option to delete the picture, but I couldn't. Besides Camille's wedding pictures, which I didn't spend time fawning over, it was one of the only pieces of tangible evidence Iker even existed. Noting the time, I stood and sent up a quick prayer he still existed somewhere, that he hadn't been yet another casualty in a war the news didn't even bother covering anymore. Not that anyone would even think to tell me if something had happened to him. I was nothing to him, and I had to remind myself he was no longer allowed to be everything to me. The elevator ride was short, and I arrived at the reception desk for Overland Financial exactly 6 minutes early for my interview. I used those 6 minutes to mentally prepare, which was 10,000 times harder with Iker's memory shoving every thought to the side and causing general chaos in my brain. By minute 7, I sat across from Peter Overland, my father's local rival. By minute 10, we'd gone over my resume and fascination with hedge fund management. "So tell me, Ms. Vaughn, why manage money?" he asked, peering over thin-framed glasses at me. His stare cut me to the quick, and I got the feeling he saw way more than applicants wanted him to. He had his pick of any polished, educated, smooth graduate whom he wanted. I could give him the canned, easy answer and still have a shot at the internship. But if I'd won it easy, I would be over at Vaughn Enterprises. "I like money," I told him truthfully. "It has tremendous potential for good when grown and nurtured carefully." "Potential for good?" He leaned back in his chair, taking my resume with him. "Yes, sir. I've learned over the last year that my income, when carefully tended, gives me the opportunity to invest in charity, to do more with it than spend it frivolously." His silver brows puckered. "When tended? Why not simply give it all to charity? Wouldn't you argue that has a greater benefit?" "Sure, once. But by growing income, we can invest in good works consistently, without threatening future donations. In fact, I would argue that with precise and careful management, we can invest even more." My body clamored to shift positions, but I refused to give away my nerves by fidgeting. "Interesting." I had zero clue if he was being sarcastic or not. "So, Ms. Vaughn, are you any relation to Corbin Vaughn?" "We share a few genes." I kept my eyes on him, ignoring the instinct to glance through his corner office windows at Dad's firm across the street. His eyebrows rose, but that was the only outward sign he'd even heard me. "Your GPA is impressive, but so is every other candidate who walks into this room. So I'll ask you the same question I asked them." Perfect. Good thing my skirt was black because I knew my sweaty palms would have left giant handprints on the material. "What's the most daring investment you've made personally?" He leaned forward and placed my resume on the shiny expanse of mahogany desk separating us. Iker's face came to mind. Well, at least this would distinguish me from the rest. Either he'd laugh or he'd send me packing. "I paid a stranger to be my date to my sister's wedding." Mr. Overland's eyes widened and sparked with what I hoped was interest. "It was a $10,000 investment made for the singular purpose of shaking up my family and paying my stepsister back for being terrible to me. While the dividends weren't seen financially, they were certainly felt in exactly the manner I'd anticipated while striking the deal. It was a $10,000 investment I'd never once regretted making. Even on the darkest, hardest days when I was certain I'd never stop hurting, I still hadn't regretted it. And did you feel personally satisfied with the outcome of your investment? A corner of his mouth lifted.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?